Hey and welcome to Neverwinter with Aragon. So earlier this week they officially released the new lockbox, Deathly Delights, and it brings with it a new mount which we have already tested and checked out in a previous video, so you can check that for the details and whether you should get it. But now we want to have a look at the new artifact, as we were not able to do so in that video. If you were having issues where you could not equip it, this has been hotfixed. This was due to a result of having bound the Night Flame sensor. So yes, I had that bug, I wasn't able to open the pack, but now we can, and we can actually test this thing out and see if it's any good. But that's not all in this video. We also want to have a look and test out Rattigan the Wise, who comes from the current battle pass, and rank him on the other single target damage companions. Additionally, I've done some further testing, and I can confirm they've actually nerfed Lysaera a bit when we look at her DPS compared to how it was, and they've also changed her equip power, which wasn't working, to a new version of it, which is technically worse than if the previous version actually worked. So we can have a look at that and confirm my tests on it, whether it actually works properly. But first we jump back to the new artifact, and an issue I have is you cannot slot the Demon Skull and the Grace of Pelor. I guess they have the same coding, and behind the scenes they're considered the same artifact. You cannot have both of them at the same time. So no problem having either or, but not both at once on any of your slots. So that's something to keep in mind before you get that artifact. But that will very likely get fixed in the near future. The devs just need to be aware of it. Now, just looking at the artifact itself as a standalone piece that you may use in a secondary slot, we can see it's got some great stats. 2600 item level is at the top of the range of any of them, and it has some very good stats for damage dealers, power, crit severity, and combat advantage. So it is one of the best to use as a secondary just for stats. The only alternatives with 2600 item level is the Sealing Parchment, Broken Halo, Crimson Calamity, Night Flame Sensor, and the Aragon from the April Fowls event, which should be coming again this April. But many of those I just listed are either from other lockboxes, or like these two, from older battle passes which you can no longer get. So the appeal to get this artifact is definitely there just for its stats. However, let's have a look at its effectiveness as a primary artifact. Should you be using it actively and casting it to help with artifact calls? To help rank it, I have my artifact sheets here for trials and then for 5-man dungeons. So just reading the description, we can see it's going to spawn 3 imps. They're going to deal a bit of damage, and only when they perish are they going to deal this extra AoE damage and cause targets who are hit to take 3% more damage from all sources, along with reducing their accuracy by 3% for 10 seconds. So what this means is when we go in combat and we go to cast this artifact, you will see those imps appear. As long as we attack our target, so will the imps. So they're going to do a bit of damage here, as you can see they're doing, and then they will start exploding, one after the other, 2 seconds apart. The first one will explode 8 seconds after you cast the artifact, the second 10 seconds later, and the third 12 seconds later. And then they put these stacks on the target, but only when they explode. You see the fire stack, there's the second one, and here's the third one. And it does refresh the stacks as another gets added. And only when you have 3 stacks are you going to gain a full 9% increase to damage from all sources and 9% reduction to the enemy's accuracy. This reduction to enemy's accuracy is kind of irrelevant, so it's not really something I'm going to consider for this artifact. It just really won't help anybody except a tank who's got deflect. So with that 9% in mind, we can go to rank them. So for trials, we take the debuff value to be 150%. We call anything a debuff, which is something that's applied to an enemy, and in this case causes them to take increased damage, just like this here. This is a debuff. So during an artifact call, you're going to cast many other artifacts that are all going to do the same result, causing the target to take increased damage. And everybody in the party will cast their unique artifact, like one of these from the list, and after you cast like 10 of them, you're going to have upwards of 150% debuffs when you also include the mounts that can also provide these debuffs. And so when we add this artifact to that, a 9% increase, and we look at the damage formula here, we will find that 9% increase is only overall a 3.6% damage increase. So you would only see your damage being increased by this amount. So you would go from this value to this value. So in terms of these other artifacts, it's not very effective. It's exactly in line with the Broken Halo. And similarly, for dungeon artifacts, yes, you're going to have a bit less debuffs at only about 90% total because you only have 5 players now. So we go from 90% to 99%. That is a 4.74% increase. But that again only puts it in line with the Broken Halo, quite a bit behind all these other artifacts, which are a minimum of like 10% debuffs. So compared to all these others, it's not really worth using. On top of that, it has that wacky thing with the imps needing to explode. So it's going to take the artifact 12 seconds after you cast it before you actually gain the full effect. So not an artifact I would use for artifact calls. And on this ranking, I will put it in red, similar to the Jewel of Caldera, Thirst, because those are just not practical artifacts to use and not worth casting compared to Demogorgon's Reach, which yes has a bit of this stacking effect, but the sheer amount of benefit it has due to, I guess it's kind of a bug, it can cause you to deal a lot of extra damage. So yes, I would only take this artifact if you want to use it for its stats. And that means the ultimate verdict on should you open this lockbox or not is going to be down to how progressed you are in the game. If you still need Mount Bolster, you still need one with a good combat power for boss fights and you're a physical damage dealer, I would go with the Mount and I would get it from this lockbox or from other players on the auction. As for the artifact, also, if you don't have the other artifacts with 2600 item level and you're a damage dealer, yes, I would probably go with it. Even as a healer, item level can be useful. But keep in mind, item level is only useful if you're running master content. Everything else is scaled down unless you're only just hitting the item level requirements. But let's move on from that and have a look at this companion and how good is it. Again, he's from the existing battle pass, so you still have the opportunity to obtain him by purchasing the premium pass. But if we go in combat here to check out his capabilities, the first thing I'm surprised by is how small he actually is. He's a teensy little guy who just floats there on his wings. But in terms of his abilities, he's just all single target. And he does very nicely have a support effect which actually works. He puts this curse on the target, and this causes the target to take 1% increased damage. The cooldown on it is 10 seconds and it only lasts 5 seconds, so the uptime's about half, so not as good as some others. And when we look at the debuff value of 150%, this is only going to be 0.4%. Considering he doesn't have full uptime, I'll put that even down to 0.2%. So I wouldn't use him for that. But we can rank him in terms of single target damage versus these others. Using the advanced combat tracker here to track all of his damage output and get a DPS score, we find after 20 minutes, it settles at about 157,000. With having a max hit of over 1.9 million. That's higher than anything we've seen here. But with a DPS score like this, that's actually going to put him in 3rd position here. He's a very solid companion to use just as a damage dealer. His support effect is unfortunately not great. If I were the devs, I would have put this support effect to be something more like at least 3% more damage to 5% more damage. Because again, that gets heavily diminished when you have already so many other debuffs during an artifact call. So I personally wouldn't get him. Endgame is very dependent on having these buffer companions and not necessarily ones that just have a good DPS score. As even if they have a low DPS, they make up for giving these buffs to the team and causing everybody else as their actual characters to deal more damage. Another important thing to note is he's currently bugged with his player bonus. This utility power does not give combined rating, which is terrible. What that results in is your stats all getting reduced by 0.9%. We go from 40.1% power to when we actually slot this thing. Keep in mind we're switching off something that doesn't give us any power to this new one, which will only trigger when we critically hit. But since it doesn't have combined rating, we lose 0.9% of all of our stats, every single one of them, because that's what combined rating does. It adds that 900 to all your stats. And since this doesn't have it, unlike every other ability, and they should, so definitely don't use this ability while it's in its bugged state. But on from there, we can check out that they've actually nerfed Lysaera a bit. Just checking her damage on the dummy. I don't know when they did this, and it could have been like a few weeks, a month after they actually released this companion, because I didn't go back and test, but they never said they really changed her effectiveness in combat. But we can see in Module 32, her DPS score is now at about 160,000 DPS. That does mean she is still one of the best, but slightly behind the Blaspheme Assassin. But you have to keep in mind the caveat of the Blaspheme Assassin is she's required to be in combat for nearly 50 seconds to stack up those bleeds, unless you have multiple Blaspheme Assassins in the group to help stack each other. So in most cases, Lysaera would just be better. As for the actual companion bonus, this has been changed to cause the target to take 1.2% incoming damage for 10 seconds. As we tested, 1% increase to incoming damage was very, very little. So this is still going to be very, very ineffective. And that's compared to the defense reduction it should have had. I tested it when it released 6 months ago, and you can see it should have been a 4.5% reduction to the enemy's defense and not what they just changed it to here. Their excuse for this change was that critters don't have a defense statistic. I don't know what code they're looking at, but they could very simply have copy and pasted the code from Armor Break, which reduces the target's defense by 9%, and we can clearly see a damage increase when we test this. We can see these are our damage stats in game. Adding them to the calculator, we get our expected damage output. You can check in the combat logs, look for critical hit, or we look on ACT, and we can see we're getting the expected value. Then we will go and switch to Armor Break. Now we attack our target, and in doing so, we should trigger Armor Break on the dummy. There we go, and we should see a damage increase. We've gone up to 31,460 damage per hit, and so we go to our damage calculator, we reduce the target's defense down to 41%, and that's the expected value. And that's the value we are getting with a defense reduction on our target, which starts at 50%. So I don't know what the devs are doing saying that critters don't have defense. Maybe they just don't understand how the formulas were set up by previous dev teams, because there are so many defense reduction bonuses in the game that do work. Armor Break is one of them. Illustria's Grace Ring is another. The Bregan shirt here too. And so is your Dark Fire on Drow and Fairy Fire on the Renegade. All those defensive bonuses work. So I don't know why the devs can't just copy and paste that for the Lysaera Companion. Instead of doing so, they've changed it to a nearly useless 1% incoming damage, which is 1.2% at Mythic. Not what was originally advertised 6 months ago. Moving on to another companion, which you had to spend Zen to obtain, so in a lot of cases real world money, you had to open keys to get him. The Crimson Golem claims to reduce the target's defense. Another defensive bonus that the new dev team couldn't get to work. But this time, they still have not done something about it. You attack your target, the Golem will go and attack. He doesn't do a lot of damage, but he applies that shifting shards. Again, it claims to be able to reduce the target's defense, but it does absolutely nothing. Our effectiveness, 66.7, is exactly what we get with normal damage output. There's no change, no damage increase. And this is one I tested at the very beginning and still has not been updated to work in any way there. And again, people had to open a lot of keys to get him at the time. So they're not exactly happy that it doesn't at least do something in the way of increasing people's damage against the target. On top of that, its DPS score is pretty miserable, which is a bit sad, but it is more of a multi-target companion. And I do want to make a new test for that rather than adding new ones here. Because the devs did do really awesome thing in the training room was to add these 5 conjured fighters, which we can use then to much better get an AoE test. Just the raw effectiveness of a group of targets that these companions can deal damage to. Yes, it's going to, in most cases, make it a pretty ideal setup for them because they're that close together. But if you do have a good tank in the group that does have grouping up effects and can kite them tightly, then this would be a good situation for a companion and we can better test like this. Finally, another thing I would love the devs to fix is the Black Death Scorpion in the training room. He currently just teleports like this. It just keeps respawning here. This was a bug that we've seen with this companion in the Zariel's trial. They fixed it there. Hopefully they can fix it too here. But that concludes the video. Hopefully there was something insightful here in this one. And thanks all for watching. Another massive thank you to the support of my channel members. And we'll see you guys around.